Politics. China's constitution states that the People's Republic of China is a socialist state under the People's Democratic Dictatorship led by the working class and based on the alliance of workers and peasants, and that the state organs apply the principle of democratic centralism. The PRC is one of the world's only socialist states openly endorsing communism, see ideology of the Communist Party of China. The Chinese government has been variously described as communist and socialist, but also as authoritarian and corporatist, with heavy restrictions in many areas, most notably against free access to the Internet, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, the right to have children, free formation of social organizations and freedom of religion. Its current political, ideological and economic system has been termed by its leaders as the People's Democratic Dictatorship, socialism with Chinese characteristics, which is Marxism adapted to Chinese circumstances, and the socialist market economy respectively. Communist Party. China's constitution declares that the country is ruled under the leadership of the Communist Party of China, CPC. As China is a de facto one-party state, the General Secretary, party leader, holds ultimate power and authority over state and government, serving as the paramount leader. The electoral system is pyramidal. Local people's congresses are directly elected, and higher levels of people's congresses up to the National People's Congress, NPC, are indirectly elected by the People's Congress of the level immediately below. The political system is decentralized, and provincial and sub-provincial leaders have a significant amount of autonomy. Another 8 political parties have representatives in the NPC and the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, CPPCC. China supports the Leninist principle of democratic centralism, but critics describe the elected National People's Congress as a rubber stamp body. Government. The President is the titular head of state, elected by the National People's Congress. The Premier is the head of government, presiding over the State Council composed of 4 vice premiers and the heads of ministries and commissions. The incumbent president is Xi Jinping, who is also the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China and the chairman of the Central Military Commission, making him China's paramount leader. The incumbent premier is Li Keqiang, who is also a senior member of the CPC Politburo Standing Committee, China's de facto top decision-making body. There have been some moves toward political liberalization, in that open contested elections are now held at the village and town levels. However, the party retains effective control over government appointments. In the absence of meaningful opposition, the CPC wins by default most of the time. Political concerns in China include the growing gap between rich and poor and government corruption. Nonetheless, the level of public support for the government and its management of the nation is high, with 80 to 95% of Chinese citizens expressing satisfaction with the central government, according to a 2011 survey. Administrative divisions. The People's Republic of China is divided into 22 provinces, 5 autonomous regions, each with a designated minority group, 4 municipalities, and 2 special administrative regions, SARs, which enjoy a degree of political autonomy. These 31 provincial-level divisions can be collectively referred to as mainland China, a term which usually excludes 2 SARs of Hong Kong and Macau. Geographically, all 31 provincial divisions can be grouped into 6 regions, including North China, Northeast China, East China, South Central China, Southwest China, and Northwest China. China considers Taiwan to be its 23rd province, although Taiwan is governed by the Republic of China, which rejects the PRC's claim. None of the divisions are recognized by the ROC government, which claims the entirety of the PRC's territory. Foreign relations. The PRC has diplomatic relations with 175 countries and maintains embassies in 162. Its legitimacy is disputed by the Republic of China and a few other countries. It is thus the largest and most populous state with limited recognition. In 1971, the PRC replaced the Republic of China as the sole representative of China in the United Nations and as one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. China was also a former member and leader of the Non-Aligned Movement, and still considers itself an advocate for developing countries. Along with Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa, China is a member of the BRICS group of emerging major economies and hosted the group's 3rd official summit at Sanya, Hainan in April 2011. Under its interpretation of the One China policy, Beijing has made it a precondition to establishing diplomatic relations that the other country acknowledges its claim to Taiwan and severs official ties with the government of the Republic of China. Chinese officials have protested on numerous occasions when foreign countries have made diplomatic overtures to Taiwan, especially in the matter of armament sales. Much of current Chinese foreign policy is reportedly based on Premier Zhou Enlai's 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, and is also driven by the concept of harmony without uniformity, which encourages diplomatic relations between states despite ideological differences. This policy may have led China to support states that are regarded as dangerous or repressive by Western nations, such as Zimbabwe, North Korea, and Iran. China has a close economic and military relationship with Russia, and the two states often vote in unison in the UN Security Council. Trade relations equals. In recent decades, China has played an increasing role in calling for free trade areas and security pacts amongst its Asia-Pacific neighbors. China became a member of the World Trade Organization, WTO, on December 11, 2001. In 2004, it proposed an entirely new East Asia Summit, EAS, framework as a forum for regional security issues. The EAS, which includes ASEAN Plus 3, India, Australia, and New Zealand, held its inaugural summit in 2005. China is also a founding member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, along with Russia and the Central Asian republics. In 2000, the United States Congress approved Permanent Normal Trade Relations, PNTR, with China, allowing Chinese exports in at the same low tariffs as goods from most other countries. China has a significant trade surplus with the United States, its most important export market. In the early 2010s, U.S. politicians argued that the Chinese yuan was significantly undervalued, giving China an unfair trade advantage. In recent decades, China has followed a policy of engaging with African nations for trade and bilateral cooperation. In 2012, Sino-African trade totaled over $160 billion. China has furthermore strengthened its ties with major South American economies, becoming the largest trading partner of Brazil and building strategic links with Argentina. China has the second biggest economy in the world. According to Bloomberg News, China is planning to reduce the average tariff rate on imports from its trading partners by October 2018. In July 2018, China had also cut import tariffs on approximately 1,500 consumer products so as to open up the economy of the country. In September 2018, the U.S. announced that it would increase tariffs on $250 billion of goods from China, from 10% to 25%, leading China to also increase tariffs on $110 billion of products from the U.S. In early December, however, there was a temporary reprieve in the 2018 China-United States trade war. During a dinner at the 2018 G20 Buenos Aires summit, Donald Trump and Xi Jinping agreed to delay increases in tariffs for 90 days to allow time for negotiations of their trade disputes. If at the end of that period, the parties are unable to reach an agreement, the 10% tariffs will be raised to 25%, according to a White House statement. Sarah Huckabee Sanders told the news media that China had agreed to purchase a very substantial amount of soybeans and other agricultural, energy, industrial, and other products from the U.S. A Chinese spokesman provided fewer specifics but said that the two heads of state reached consensus to halt the mutual increase of new tariffs and that the country would increase its purchases from the U.S. to gradually ease the imbalance in two-way trade. Territorial disputes equals. Ever since its establishment after the Second Chinese Civil War, the PRC has claimed the territories governed by the Republic of China, ROC, a separate political entity today commonly known as Taiwan, as a part of its territory. It regards the island of Taiwan as its Taiwan province, Kinmen and Matsu as a part of Fujian province and islands the ROC controls in the South China Sea as a part of Hainan province and Guangdong province. These claims are controversial because of the complicated cross-strait relations, with the PRC treating the One China policy as one of its most important diplomatic principles. In addition to Taiwan, China is also involved in other international territorial disputes. Since the 1990s, China has been involved in negotiations to resolve its disputed land borders, including a disputed border with India and an undefined border with Bhutan. China is additionally involved in multilateral disputes over the ownership of several small islands in the East and South China Seas, such as the Senkaku Islands and the Scarborough Shoal. On May 21, 2014, Xi Jinping, speaking at a conference in Shanghai, pledged to settle China's territorial disputes peacefully. China stays committed to seeking peaceful settlement of disputes with other countries over territorial sovereignty and maritime rights and interests, he said. Emerging superpower status equals. China is regularly hailed as a potential new superpower, with certain commentators citing its rapid economic progress, growing military might, very large population, and increasing international influence as signs that it will play a prominent global role in the 21st century. Others, however, warn that economic bubbles and demographic imbalances could slow or even halt China's growth as the century progresses. Some authors also question the definition of superpower, arguing that China's large economy alone would not qualify it as a superpower, and noting that it lacks the military power and cultural influence of the United States. Socio-political issues, human rights and reform. The Chinese democracy movement, social activists, and some members of the Communist Party of China have all identified the need for social and political reform. While economic and social controls have been significantly relaxed in China since the 1970s, political freedom is still tightly restricted. The Constitution of the People's Republic of China states that the fundamental rights of citizens include freedom of speech, freedom of the press, the right to a fair trial, freedom of religion, universal suffrage, and property rights. However, in practice, these provisions do not afford significant protection against criminal prosecution by the state. Although some criticisms of government policies and the ruling Communist Party are tolerated, censorship of political speech and information, most notably on the Internet, are routinely used to prevent collective action. In 2005, Reporters Without Borders ranked China 159th out of 167 states in its annual World Press Freedom Index, indicating a very low level of press freedom. In 2014, China ranked 175th out of 180 countries. Rural migrants to China's cities often find themselves treated as second-class citizens by the Hukou household registration system, which controls access to state benefits. Property rights are often poorly protected, and taxation disproportionately affects poorer citizens. However, a number of rural taxes have been reduced or abolished since the early 2000s, and additional social services provided to rural dwellers. A number of foreign governments, foreign press agencies, and NGOs also routinely criticize China's human rights record, alleging widespread civil rights violations such as detention without trial, forced abortions, forced confessions, torture, restrictions of fundamental rights, and excessive use of the death penalty. The government suppresses popular protests and demonstrations that it considers a potential threat to social stability, as was the case with the Tiananmen Square protests of 1989. Falun Gong was first taught publicly in 1992. In 1999, when there were 70 million practitioners, the persecution of Falun Gong began, resulting in mass arrests, extralegal detention, and reports of torture and deaths in custody. The Chinese state is regularly accused of large-scale repression and human rights abuses in Tibet and Xinjiang, including violent police crackdowns and religious oppression. At least 120,000 members of China's Muslim Uyghur minority have been detained in mass detention camps, termed re-education camps, aimed at changing the political thinking of detainees, their identities, and their religious beliefs. The state has even sought to control offshore reporting of tensions in Xinjiang, intimidating foreign-based reporters by detaining their family members. The Chinese government has responded to foreign criticism by arguing that the right to subsistence and economic development is a prerequisite to other types of human rights, and that the notion of human rights should take into account a country's present level of economic development. It emphasizes the rise in the Chinese standard of living, literacy rate, and average life expectancy since the 1970s, as well as improvements in workplace safety and efforts to combat natural disasters such as the perennial Yangtze River floods. Furthermore, some Chinese politicians have spoken out in support of democratization, although others remain more conservative. Some major reform efforts have been conducted. For instance, in November 2013 the government announced plans to relax the one-child policy and abolish the much-criticized re-education through labor program, although human rights groups note that reforms to the latter have been largely cosmetic. During the 2000s and early 2010s, the Chinese government was increasingly tolerant of NGOs that offer practical, efficient solutions to social problems, but such third-sector activity remained heavily regulated. The Global Slavery Index estimated that in 2016 more than 3.8 million people were living in conditions of modern slavery, or 0.25% of the population, including victims of human trafficking, forced labor, forced marriage, child labor, and state-imposed forced labor. All except the last category are legal. The state-imposed forced system was formally abolished in 2013, but it is not clear the extent to which its various practices have stopped. The Chinese penal system includes labor prison factories, detention centers, and re-education camps, which fall under the heading Laogai, Reform Through Labor. The Laogai Research Foundation in the United States estimated that there were over 1,000 slave labor prisons and camps, known collectively as the Laogai. Prisoners are not paid at all, and need their families to send money to them. Prisoners who refuse to work are beaten, and some are beaten to death. Many of the prisoners are political or religious dissidents, and some are recognized internationally as prisoners of conscience. A Chinese president said that they want to see two products coming out of the prisons: the man who has been reformed, and the product made by the man. Harry Wu, himself a former prisoner of the Laogai, filmed undercover footage of the Laogai, and was charged with stealing state secrets. For this, Harry Wu was sentenced to 15 years in prison, but only served 66 days before being deported to the United States.